Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking a fascinating look today at some research exploring a more, well, sustainable way to add color to silk fabric.
Yeah, and it uses something you might just walk past, actually. Tiptonweed, also known as Hypericum perforatum.
Right, so for you, our listener, the learner, someone who enjoys getting to the core of interesting topics quickly.
This deep dive connects textile science, our growing need for environmental responsibility, and even the smart world of artificial intelligence. It's a really neat illustration.
Yeah, how different fields can kind of mesh together.
Exactly. Our goal here is to bring you the most interesting and useful bits from this study without getting bogged down in, overly complex details.
Think of it as your quick route to understanding this blend of nature and, well, high-tech innovation.
That's it. The study we're focusing on looked at what happens when you treat silk fabric with air plasma before dyeing it.
Okay.
And the dye is a natural colorant from Tiptonweed. They also used a microwave to help with the dyeing process itself, which is another sustainable angle.
Microwaves. Interesting.
Yeah, and they even built a computer model, an AI model, to predict the results. So it's quite a thorough piece of work.
Okay, so maybe let's start with the basics. Why are scientists even looking at natural dyes like this these days? What's the problem with how we usually color fabrics?
That's a great place to kick things off. The usual way, conventional dyeing, it heavily involves synthetic dyes. Many of these come from petrochemicals.
Right, oil-based.
Exactly. And producing them, using them.
Yeah.
It can release some pretty nasty chemicals into the environment. We're talking salts, acids, bases, things that cause pollution.
Harmful stuff.
Definitely. Harmful to ecosystems, potentially harmful to our health, too.
So not exactly the greenest process, then?
Not at all. And as we all become more aware of these environmental issues and regulations get stricter, the textile industry is really actively looking for greener alternatives.
Makes sense.
And natural dyes, well, they often come from renewable sources like plants. They tend to break down more easily in the environment, biodegradable.
And it's not just about the color either, is it? I think I read some natural dyes have other benefits.
You're right. Sometimes they can give fabrics extra properties, things like better resistance to flames or insects, or even antibacterial qualities or UV protection.
Wow, that's quite a bonus. The paper mentioned other natural sources being explored too, didn't it? Like hibiscus flowers, blueberry skins.
It did, yeah. It shows there's a whole world of natural color out there. Researchers are looking into a huge range of materials, plants, sometimes insects, even minerals, all with this potential for sustainable color.
Fascinating. Okay, now this study uses something called plasma pretreatment. What exactly is plasma in this context? It sounds a bit sci-fi.
Hey, yeah, it can sound like that, but
Yeah.
think of it like supercharged air. It's basically a gas that's been energized so much that some of its particles, electrons and ions, become charged.
Okay.
Now, for textiles, plasma treatment can do a few main things. It can put a coating on, it can clean or slightly roughen the surface, that's called etching, or it can functionalize it, change its surface properties.
And in this study, it's the cleaning and roughening part that's important, the etching.
Exactly. That's the key here.
How does roughening the surface help with dyeing?
Good question. This slight etching, it can remove tiny impurities from the fabric surface, but more importantly, it changes how well the fabric absorbs liquids, its wettability.
Ah, so it makes it easier for the dye solution to soak in.
Precisely. If a surface is more wettable, it can soak up that dye much more effectively.
Like making the silk extra thirsty for the color.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And the paper mentions earlier studies, too, where silk was treated with different plasmas, oxygen, nitrogen, argon.
Well, what do they find?
They generally found improvements, things like stronger colors, better color fastness, meaning the color doesn't rub off easily, better water wicking by the fabric, and just overall better dye absorption.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's zoom in on the Tiptonweed. Why did these researchers pick this particular plant?
Well, Hypericum perforatum, or Tiptonweed, it's part of this growing interest in natural products generally. Not just for dyes, but for medicines, even things like solar cells.
Really?
Yeah, because they tend to be biodegradable, better for the environment. So these researchers were curious about its potential, specifically as a natural dye for silk.
And how did they actually get the dye from the weed? Was it complicated?
Actually, pretty straightforward. They dried the plant material, then basically just boiled it in distilled water for about an hour.
Just boiled it.
Yep. The colored liquid they got from that was their natural dye solution.
Simple enough. Now, you mentioned the way they dyed. The silk wasn't traditional either. They used a microwave. How does that work?
That's right. Using microwave irradiation in textile processing, it's seen as a more sustainable, a green technology approach.
Why's that?
Well, unlike conventional heating, which heats from the outside in, microwaves interact directly with the molecules within the dye solution and the fabric itself. This means faster, more uniform heating.
Ah, okay. So what are the big advantages then?
Several, actually. Big one is saving energy and time. Significant savings on both.
Always good.
Definitely. And that more uniform heating can lead to a more consistent color across the fabric, less patchiness.
Right.
Plus, other research using microwaves with different natural dyes like barberry or cinnamon bark showed it can give better color quality, be more cost-effective, help extract more dye from the plant, and lead to stronger colors.
It really sounds like they're trying to make the whole process greener from multiple angles.
That seems to be the goal, yes, combining these potentially greener techniques.
So why focus specifically on silk for this?
Well, silk's always been a highly valued textile, hasn't it? It's seen as luxurious, it's soft, breathable, has that natural sheen.
True.
It's mainly of a protein called fibroin. And interestingly, silk is also being looked at more for medical uses now.
Oh, why is that?
Because it's quite compatible with the human body, it's biocompatible, and it can break down naturally over time. But despite silk being so important, the researchers pointed out there actually hasn't been a lot of specific research combining plasma treatment and natural dyes on silk, so there's a bit of a gap to explore.
Gotcha. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of their experiment. What exactly did they do? Walk us through it.
Okay, so they started with plain weave silk fabric and the Tipton weed dye extract we talked about.
Right.
Then they took samples of both raw silk and silk that had been degummed and treated them with this air vacuum plasma.
For different amounts of time.
Yes, for 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 3 minutes. The plasma itself was generated using air at a specific power level and pressure inside a chamber.
You mentioned degummed silk. What does that mean exactly?
Good question. Raw silk, straight from the cocoon, well, almost, it has this natural gummy outer layer called sericin. It protects the main fibroin fiber.
Okay.
Degumming is the process to remove that sericin. Usually involves boiling in a solution. They use sodium stearate here. Removing it changes the silk's feel, makes it softer, shinier. They removed about 25% of the weight as sericin.
Ah, okay. So they tested both the raw gummy silk and the smoother degummed silk after plasma treatment. What happened next?
After the plasma bit, they dye the silk samples using that microwave-assisted method with the Tipton weed dye.
Right, the microwave.
Yeah. They use a specific ratio of dye liquid to fabric weight the liquor ratio, and they varied the dyeing time. 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20 minutes.
Lots of variables to test.
Indeed. After dyeing, the samples were rinsed well to get rid of loose dye. Then they did a soaping treatment, which helps fix the dye properly, and finally just air dry them.
Okay, quite a process. And how did they figure out what actually happened? How did they analyze the results?
They use a whole battery of techniques. To look at the physical changes on the fiber surface, they used a scanning electron microscope and SEM. See that etching effect?
Okay, see the roughness.
Exactly. Then they used something called Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, or FTIR. That looks at the chemical bonds, the functional groups on the surface, to see if the plasma caused any major chemical changes. We'll get to that. Then for the color itself, they used colorimetric analysis. This gives precise numbers for color using the C-Lab system L for lightness, A for red-green, B for yellow-blue, and also KS value, which measures color strength.
KS for color strength. Got it.
And finally, really important, they did fastness tests, checking how well the color held up against washing, exposure to light, and rubbing, both wet and dry rubbing.
Okay, comprehensive testing. So what were the big takeaways? What did they find out? Let's start with the surface, the SEM stuff.
Right. The SEM images clearly showed that plasma treatment did roughen the surface on both the raw silk and the degummed silk.
As expected.
Yes. And the longer the plasma treatment, the rougher the surface became. Interestingly, the raw silk, which still had that sericin layer, was already a bit rougher naturally, and the plasma kind of enhanced that roughness even more.
And the chemical structure. The FTIR.
The FTIR results showed no significant changes in the main chemical functional groups of the silk fiber after the plasma treatment.
So it roughened the surface without actually damaging the underlying silk chemistry.
That seems to be the case, yes. Which is good. You want to modify the surface ideally, not degrade the whole fiber.
Right. What about the color results? Did the plasma help the silk take up more dye?
Well, the color analysis showed a couple of things. The plasma treatment itself tended to cause a slight yellowing of the silk.
Yellowing. Why?
Probably some oxidation happening on the fiber surface from the air plasma, but it didn't really affect the red, green, or black-white scales much.
Okay. And the color strength, the KS values.
Generally, the KS values, the color strength, were higher for the raw silk compared to the degummed silk.
Oh, that's interesting. Why would the raw silk take up more color?
The researchers suggested it might be because the sericin layer is somewhat hydrophobic, water-repelling. This could, counterintuitively, lead to a higher concentration of dye getting absorbed onto certain areas of the fiber surface.
Huh.
They also found that the duration of the plasma treatment had a more noticeable effect on the dyeability of the raw silk. And, as you'd probably guess, dyeing for longer generally increased the KS values, deeper colors, with more dyeing time.
Makes sense. And what about how well the color stayed put, the fastness tests?
Generally, the fastness improved after the silk was degummed.
Better after removing the sericin.
Yes. The thinking is that the sericin in raw silk might sort of block the dye molecules from properly binding to the main fibroin protein underneath. So removing it allows for better bonding.
I see.
And they also found that increasing the plasma pre-treatment time tended to improve the fastness properties as well, especially rubbing fastness.
So the plasma helps the dye stick better, too.
It suggested, yes, that roughened, activated surface likely helps the dye molecules anchor more effectively.
And you mentioned the environmental plus points earlier. Did this study sort of circle back to those?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They really emphasized the green aspects. First, using natural dyes like Tipton weed, renewable source, biodegradable, less toxic waste compared to synthetics. Good for biodiversity, too, potentially.
Right.
Then the plasma pretreatment itself. It uses minimal or no wet chemicals, needs less water, often less energy than traditional chemical scouring or bleaching processes.
Cleaner prep.
Exactly. And the microwave-assisted dyeing too faster, more energy-efficient heating, uniform results, potentially needing less dye overall because the uptake might be better.
So it's like a triple win for sustainability.
Kinda, yeah. Combining these different greener approaches seems quite promising.
This all sounds really positive, but then they added another layer, didn't they? The artificial intelligence part.
Yes, absolutely fascinating part of the study. They developed what they called an Optimizable Neural Network, or ONN model.
An ONN model, so AI.
Basically, yes. A type of AI that they trained to predict the dyeing results.
Predict based on what?
Based on the key variables. Whether the silk was raw or degummed, the plasma pretreatment time, 1, 2, or 3 minutes, and the microwave dyeing time, 4 to 20 minutes.
And what could it predict?
It was designed to predict those outcome measures we talked about, dry and wet rubbing fastness, the overall color change, those specific L, A, B color values, and the KS color strength.
Wow. How can a computer even predict something like how well dye sticks to fabric?
Well, essentially, they fed all the experimental data they collected, all those different conditions, and the measured results into this neural network model.
Good.
The model then learns the complex relationships, the patterns between the inputs, like plasma time, and the outputs, like color strength or fastness. They use some clever techniques like Bayesian optimization to fine-tune the model's internal settings, its hyperparameters, to make the predictions as accurate as possible.
Okay, so it learns from the data. But how well did it actually do? Was it any good at predicting?
Remarkably good, actually. They checked its performance using various statistical measures. Things like the R-squared value, which shows how much of the variation in the results the model can explain. For pretty much all the characteristics they were predicting, the R-squared values were very close to 1. Which means it was explaining almost all the variation. A near-perfect correlation between the predicted values and the actual experimental values. They also looked at error metrics, mean squared error, root mean squared error, mean absolute error, and these were all very low.
So it was really accurate.
Extremely accurate.
Sure.
They showed graphs plotting predicted versus actual results, and the points basically fell right on the line. It suggests the model really captured the underlying process dynamics.
Wow, that's incredible. So this AI model could be a really useful tool then for future research or even industry.
Exactly. That's the implication.
Wow.
It suggests you could use these kinds of models to optimize the process. Maybe figure out the best combination of plasma time and dye time to get a specific color or fastness level without having to run quite so many lab experiments.
Saving time and resources.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Reducing the trial and error involved in developing these more sustainable dyeing methods.
So to kind of wrap this all up, bring it together, what are the key things we should really take away from this deep dive into dyeing silk with Tipton weed?
I think the main takeaway is that combining these techniques, air plasma pretreatment and microwave-assisted dyeing, it really can enhance the natural dyeing of silk using something like tiptone reed extract.
And it offers a greener path forward.
Definitely. It presents a more sustainable alternative to conventional methods.
Yeah.
Less chemical reliance, lower energy use, and importantly, the successful development of that AI prediction model. It really highlights the potential for these advanced computational tools for AI in making textile processing smarter, more efficient, and ultimately more sustainable.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. And for you, the learner, we really hope this deep dive has given you a clear, concise understanding of this, well, pretty cutting-edge research. Maybe it sparked some new ideas or answered some questions about how sustainability and technology are intersecting in really interesting, perhaps unexpected ways.
Yeah, it really does show the power of looking at these challenges from multiple angles, doesn't it? And thinking about how well that AI model performed, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? What other areas, maybe in material science or other sustainable practices, could benefit from similar predictive tools? And, how might these kinds of advancements eventually help make eco-friendly production methods not just possible, but maybe more accessible and widespread?
Democratizing green tech through AI. That's definitely some food for thought.